Hello, welcome to Western Door Paranormal Studies. My name is Tony Burtis, your host, and this episode is going to be the many haunts of William Morgan. William Morgan was born in Batavia, New York. At one point, he claimed to be a captain in the War of 1812, although this has not really been substantiated by any evidence. At one point, he would move to York in Canada, today's Toronto. He would actually open up a distillery there. The distillery, however, would actually burn to the ground. This would leave him destitute. Now, eventually, of course, he would come back to the States, and somewhere it seems he would actually succeed in joining a Masonic order. Now, from one way or the other, he would actually leave the order. Eventually, later on, he would decide it was a good idea to try and get back into the order. Now, for whatever reasons that's actually a mystery, he was not allowed to rejoin the Masonic order. Now, of course, this left William pretty perturbed and pretty angry. And that's when he would begin to make some pretty dangerous threats to the Masons. The biggest threat was that he was going to write an expose book that was going to expose all the secrets of the Masonic order. Now, as you can imagine, this wasn't going to go over well with the higher-ups in the Masonic order, and that's where the tale of disappearance and murder take place. Now, William owed some money, and so he was arrested and sent to a debtor's prison for it. Now, it turns out that it was discovered that he couldn't be held indefinitely in this prison, much to the chagrin of those who sent him there. So he was released. Subsequently, he'd be rearrested on a trumped-up charge of stealing a shirt and tie. Now, eventually, while he was being incarcerated for theft, a friend would actually pick him up and help him make an escape. So he would escape the jail. Now, it would be arranged that he would be picked up at the Frontier House in Lewiston. So William would get into a carriage and would make his getaway, and it would be taken to Fort Niagara. Now, Fort Niagara is the last place that William Morgan would ever be seen alive. And that's where a lot of the mystery begins, because no one really knew what happened to him. He was just never seen again, so it was presumed he was murdered. Now, a body would wash up on the shores of Lake Ontario near Margam Manor. Now, his wife would actually identify the body as his, even though it was actually wearing another man's clothes. Now, the body was badly decomposed. Now, there is a lot of what we call power spirits. Not all spirits are actually happy to rattle doorknobs and move shoes and turn off lights in just one location. There are a lot of spirits, known as power spirits, who actually can haunt many different places. Al Capone, Marilyn Monroe, Elvis Presley, George Washington, Mad Dog Anthony Wayne, just to name a few of the ones that were noted to haunt many different locations. Now, Western New York, not to be outdone, would actually have a couple such spirits. One is the famous orator Red Jacket. Now, that is actually a story for another day. However, the subject of our talk here is William Morgan, and he actually haunts several different locations. It's kind of like the William Morgan Trail, if you will, from the beginning to the actual end. The first place that he is known to haunt is, of course, the Frontier House in Lewiston. Now, at one point, the Frontier House was a McDonald's, and a lot of the employees there would be tormented by a spirit that just was not friendly. It would seem that would actually fit into the MO of William Morgan, although it has never been described as such. Of course, the McDonald's is no longer there, but the Frontier House is just one such place. Now, I actually investigated the Little Yellow Chocolate House, which was right next door, and it's my opinion that it's possible that that could be another source of a William Morgan haunting. So we have two. Not to be outdone, we have a third. The third would actually be Fort Niagara itself, the last known place that William Morgan was actually seen alive. Now, the reports there, other than the possible sightings of Morgan himself, people see the spectral black carriage pulling up to the fort, the very same carriage that held the captured Mason. Finally, The last place that seems to have a tie to the William Morgan ghost is actually Margam Manor. Somewhere in the property of Margam Manor supposedly is the sinking rock that he was tied to when he was thrown into Lake Ontario. So actually William Morgan is seen wandering the grounds of Margam Manor. So there is actually 3 different locations. Now another aspect of this whole thing that's very important to know is that the abduction and murder of William Morgan started the anti-Masonic movement, because at that point it was considered a dangerous order if they were capable of just starting to murder regular citizens. And for a long time there was a lot of push to get rid of all Masonic order and any of the other groups, so to speak, that were tied to them, like the Odd Fellows. Anything like that was actually subject to persecution and closure by those who actually were in the Masonic movement. And the anti-Masonic movement is traced back to the abduction of William Morgan. Now William Morgan actually, even though he was a Mason once, he was never actually anti-Mason. So the anti-Masons were the ones that actually showed up after the murder of William Morgan. And that here is the story of William Morgan. Now here in the Batavia Cemetery, the body of William Morgan is not buried. What we have here in the cemetery is the monument dedicated to the memory of William Morgan.